Lesson 43. Let's begin with our first word, alternate. A useful phrase to remember is alternate partners. To alternate means to change back and forth between two things. If two students take turns leading a group, they alternate their roles. A blinking light alternates between on and off. The phrase alternate partners is used when talking about switching or rotating between different people in a group or activity. Now, let's have a look at congregate. A helpful phrase for this word is church members congregate. To congregate means to gather in a group. People congregate in parks for picnics, and birds congregate in trees before flying south. A church congregation is a group of people who meet to worship. The phrase church members congregate is used when describing people gathering in a church for a service or event. Next, we have eloquent. A good phrase to remember is eloquent speaker. If someone is eloquent, they speak in a graceful and persuasive way. A great leader is often an eloquent speaker, inspiring people with their words. A poet might use eloquent language to express deep emotions. The phrase eloquent speaker is used when talking about someone who speaks clearly and impressively. Let's move on to glucose. An example phrase is glucose sugar. Glucose is a type of sugar that the body uses for energy. Fruits, honey, and bread contain glucose. Doctors check glucose levels in the blood to see if a person's body is processing sugar properly. The phrase glucose sugar is used when talking about the natural sugar that fuels the body's cells. Now let's talk about inferior. A useful phrase is inferior quality. If something is inferior, it is lower in quality or rank compared to something else. Cheap shoes made from weak materials are of inferior quality compared to strong, well-made shoes. In history, some groups were treated as inferior because of unfair discrimination. The phrase inferior quality is used when describing something that is not as good as another option. Next, we have maneuver. A great phrase for this word is practice attack maneuvers. A maneuver is a planned movement, especially in military or skilled actions. A pilot performs maneuvers to control an airplane during training. A soccer player maneuvers around defenders to score a goal. The phrase practice attack maneuvers is used when talking about training exercises in the military or strategic movements in sports. Let's move on to obligation. An important phrase to remember is obligation to pay. An obligation is something a person must do, either by law or duty. People have an obligation to pay taxes. Parents have an obligation to take care of their children. The phrase obligation to pay is used when talking about a required payment, like rent or a loan. Now, let's discuss preliminary. A phrase to associate with this word is preliminary questions. If something is preliminary, it happens before the main event or process. Before a job interview, there might be preliminary questions to test a person's basic skills. A basketball team plays preliminary games before the championship. The phrase preliminary questions is used when referring to the first set of questions asked before something important begins. Next, we have segregation. A useful phrase is segregation of blacks and whites. Segregation means separating people based on differences like race, religion, or gender. In U.S. history, segregation of blacks and whites meant that African Americans were forced to use separate schools, restaurants, and buses. Segregation can also happen in schools, workplaces, or sports. The phrase segregation of blacks and whites is used when talking about racial separation in history. Finally, let's talk about unison. A helpful phrase is sing in unison. If people do something in unison, they do it together at the same time. A choir sings in unison when everyone sings the same notes at once. If a crowd claps in unison, everyone claps at the same moment. The phrase sing in unison is used when talking about people singing together in harmony. That's the end of Lesson 43. Keep practicing these words and phrases to build your vocabulary and confidence.